Hey everyone, if you're studying for your real estate examination, you probably already know that real estate contracts is one of the biggest topics covered. In fact, it makes up almost 20% of the entire test. So what we've done is we've put together the most key concepts that you need to know about real estate contracts in order to help you pass your real estate examination. So without further ado, let's get right into it.
So the elements of a valid contract, these are essentially important for us to learn for the real estate examination. And you need to know all 5 of them. And you need to understand what is a valid contract. So a valid contract is something that's legally enforceable. And in order for that to be in contracts, then we need to have 5 essential elements. And all contracts need these 5 elements. If they're missing something here, then it's not an enforceable contract, or it could be potentially voidable or void. And we'll talk about those in another video. So what are the 5 elements? There's an offer, there's an acceptance of that offer, then there's something called consideration, then there's something called legal capacity, mutual consent, and legal purpose. Now, many people will clump together offer and acceptance together, which is typically I do. It's listed here as a separate line item, but don't confuse that with for every offer. You want to remember that for every offer, there needs to be a complete acceptance of that offer. And there is a meeting of the minds where both parties understand the nature and the intent of what they're about to do. They're going to enter into a contract. So I make you an offer for the exam, to buy your house for $500,000 and to close within 30 days or in 30 days. You say yes to my offering price. You say yes to $500,000, but you say, no, I need to close in 2 weeks. So now you just rejected my offer. Even though we agreed on price, we didn't have a complete meeting of the minds. So that wasn't an acceptance of my offer. That was a counter offer. You said, okay, I'll take $500,000, but I need to close in 2 weeks. So for the exam, you want to make sure you get that sorted. Now, anything that doesn't sort of fit that bill where there's a complete acceptance of what's happening, sometimes we might have contingencies in a contract and they need to be satisfied. So that might still be, hey, we need to still do all of this and this in the future, but the complete meeting of the minds is essential in order to have it. So the opposite of an acceptance is a rejection and or a counter offer. So consideration is a element of a valid contract, and it's something good and valuable to keep the parties interested. So consideration many times is money, but it doesn't have to be. Consideration could be something like love and affection, which is something that is motivating us to continue moving forward. Obviously, when we're 2 disinterested parties, money is the motivating factor. You know, I want the money if I'm the seller, and I want the property that's worth the money if I'm the buyer. So there's this consideration. So consideration, remember, for exam purposes, is something of legal value. All right. Legal capacity simply means that the parties entering into a contract need to have the wherewithal to understand the nature and consequences of their actions. So many jurisdictions say if you are under the age of legal capacity, then you can't enter into a contract unless you're legally emancipated. Typically the jurisdictions in the United States are 18. So 18 plus is where you get into it. That's why sometimes you'll see in applications, do you have the capacity, the ability to contract? Are you above the age of 18 or 18 or above? Yes or no? And then that means, hey, yes, I have the capacity to enter into a contract. All right, so legal capacity. Now, the test questions many times will revolve around the capacity of an individual. So it could say a minor entering into a contract. Now, if a minor enters into a contract, well, that strikes at legal capacity, and now we have the valid elements of a contract being in challenge. And therefore, a minor entering into a contract would render that contract voidable, which means that one or both parties can disaffirm or get out of their obligations in a contract. So a minor has the right to make their portion of the contract voidable. Hey, all right. So we're at mutual consent. And basically, for the exam, this is a really short one. You don't need to know a whole heck of a lot here. But, I mean, obviously, mutual consent is very, very important. Both parties entering into a contract need to have, and they say this phrase a lot, a meeting of the minds. And what that means is both parties need to understand basically the gravity, the weight, the elements, and what's being back and forth in this contract, in as simple of a way as I can put it. everybody needs to be on the same page and understand the nature and consequences of a contract. Does it mean that two parties need to know every line of a contract? No, but there needs to be this mutual consent, this willingness to advance into contract. And that's what mutual consent is, a meeting of the minds and parties that are willing to enter into a contract and understand the outcomes and ramifications if they're unable to perform on that said contract. That's mutual consent. Next one is legal purpose. A contract, to be valid, needs to be for some legal reason. So the simple thing here that you see on exams many times is you might see some scenarios that the test writers put on there and say, a contract worded with this and this, offer and acceptance, consideration, legal capacity. However, it was for an illegal purpose. It was to, example, import a controlled substance into the United States, and the two parties entering into the contract had a written contract to do such. If it's a controlled or illegal substance being imported into the United States, well, then the contract is, even though it was ironclad and written by the best contract attorneys in the world, well, then it still lacks legal purpose, which in that case, you pick void. So it is no longer, if it is for an illegal purpose, then it is no longer a valid contract. And if it's no longer a valid contract, then you pick void. And if it's not void, then you have to look at legal capacity because it could be legally voidable. So you want to know valid, void, and voidable, and we're going to talk about those in an upcoming video. See you soon. Void versus voidable versus unenforceable versus valid, which we just did in a previous video. What makes a valid contract? We need to know what is void and voidable, and what is, at the end of the day, enforceable versus unenforceable. Okay, let's go through these definitions, and I'll kind of fill in the blanks if necessary. So void contracts are invalid from the beginning because it lacked one or more of the essential elements of a valid contract. And we learned about those essential elements. Remember, things like offer and acceptance, mutual consent, legal purpose, legally competent parties, capacity, and we had consideration. So something that's missing one of those elementals is going to be void. Remember that legal contract and picking void. Voidable contracts. A valid contract, but one or more parties has the option to enforce it or not, possibly due to fraud or incapacity. So a voidable contract is a valid contract. It has all of the essential elements of a valid contract. But then what we can do is one or more of the parties, they have the option to enforce it or not. And they could argue that, I was legally incompetent when I entered into the contract, for example, a minor or something like that. So those are elements that you definitely want to know for your exams. And again, that was voidable contract. Now, a contract's enforceability. This is a phrase that you see on exams. So what is unenforceable? Unenforceable contracts are initially valid, but cannot be enforced due to certain legal technicalities. And when they are talking about to be enforced, they are talking about a court. So can a court, like let's say you and I enter into a contract and we had a grievance. Well, could one of us go to a court and ask the magistrate or the judge or to review the contract and to adjudicate based off of what's most fair based on the contract language? And that would be an enforceable contract. So enforceable by the court. Now, two parties don't have to go to court, and two parties can be honorable and enter into a contract, and if they have a disagreement, can iron it out. That's absolutely possible, and that would be that it's enforceable between the parties. But what many times in Real Estate 101 courses are talking about is the enforceability at the court level. And that's what they're talking about here. So unenforceable versus enforceable contracts. Remember, an unenforceable contract is initially valid, but cannot be enforced by the courts due to certain legal technicalities. And that is the difference between void and voidable. And then now we know unenforceable and enforceable.
Hey everybody, just a quick request. If you're getting some value out of this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, because the more the channel grows, the more free content we can put together for y'all. Thank you so much, and let's get back into it.
Next topic is, what is an option agreement? On exams, you don't see a tremendous amount of test questions, so you don't have to worry too much about this, but it is useful to know a few things, like what is an option contract definition, and you kind of want to know where the test writer may want to come at this, a couple of other extra things. So let's jump into that. Number one, what is an option contract? So it's a contract where one party pays another party for the right, but not the obligation to buy or sell a property at a predetermined price within a specified time frame. So that's kind of interesting. It's, again, it's the right to buy something, but not the obligation. So I don't have to buy it if I choose to walk away from the option right. Option agreements are unilateral contracts because only one party has the duty to perform. And again, they have the right, but not the obligation. So you want to know that option contracts are unilateral contracts. Definitely something you want to know for examinations. And that's unilateral contract versus bilateral contract, where there's two promises. Unilateral, only one party has the duty to perform. There is an option or, and there's an option E. The party receiving the option right is the option E. The option or is the giver of the option right. So option contracts are definitely stuff that you see on examinations. You want to know they're unilateral contracts. You want to know that it's the right, not the obligation to do something. And you will see these very simply put on examinations. So you want to know, it could be something like all of the following are bilateral contracts except, and you just want to remember that an option contract is a unilateral contract. All right, we'll see you in the next one. How do we terminate a contract? And there's several different items that would prompt termination, and of which it could be all of the following would terminate a contract except style questions. It could talk about one of these specifically and describe an event that took place. So you might have to be able to pick one from the other. So I'm going to go through a quick list here and just talk a little bit about some of the ones that stand out to me. So first off, how do we terminate a contract? Well, the first one is the best way to do it is full performance. We fully perform our obligations on the contract. In a buy and a sell of real estate, the buyer and the seller all do what they're supposed to do. They've completed everything, and now we're at closing, and then that's a terminated contract. The contract is now terminated because all parties have performed. Cancellation. Cancellation might be an event inside of a contract that allows one or both parties to back away from the contract. That's cancellation of contract. It could be canceled for the fact that the contract was made for an illegal purpose, like one of the essential elements of a valid contract. Infeasibility of performance. So let's say we're supposed to buy a house, but the house gets destroyed or something like that, where it's an impossibility, an infeasibility. That is a reason to terminate contracts. Mutual agreements. Both parties agree to just say, no, we don't want to move forward anymore. We both agree to kind of walk away. That's mutual agreement. To rescind or rescission of contract. This is an important vocab phrase. This is something you might see. In finance, you learn about something called a 3-day right of rescission, to back out of a refinance contract. Rescission means to go back to square one as if this contract had never been put together in the first place. The difference between a rescission and a cancellation is that when you cancel a contract, there may be some sort of damage or penalty for early termination. Like if you got out of a lease too soon or something like that, there could be a fee for early termination. But a rescission brings all parties back to square one, and any monies or any kind of like services that were rendered all get recompensed. So everybody kind of walks away like nobody was hurt from entering into the contract. That is a rescission, and you'll see that on your exam. That's a standout, by the way. Revocation of contract. Breach of contract. That's a big one on real estate examinations. Breach of contract, and then a suit for specific performance is usually the breach remedy. So one party or both parties violate some of the terms of a contract, and that's a breach of contract. All right, that's another standout. Invalidity. Expiration, the time limit expired on a contract, and that could be a reason for termination of contract. Impossibility kind of goes into the same hand in hand with infeasibility of contracts and contract termination. So impossible, the property was destroyed or something happened, the buyer or the seller passed away, something, and they were the key parties to the transaction. Those are pretty significant. Bankruptcy is another thing that terminates most contracts, not all of them. And illegality, the valid items inside of a contract, and a contract made for some illegal purpose would then void the contract or render the contract terminated. And those are a list of events that could prompt or would prompt the contract termination. Focus on some of these, the ones that stood out to me: performance, rescission, breach, and illegality. And those are the four that I would also focus on and kind of learn them that way, and then you'll do fine on your exam. This next one is a lease purchase agreement. And that's, in some states, y'all are going to call these lease purchase agreements. And then in other states, y'all are going to call these contracts for deed. And then in some states, y'all are going to call these installment contracts, okay? All of them are the same thing. In essence, they are a lease purchase agreement. This is a contract where a tenant leases a property with the option to purchase it at a later date. All right. Usually after a specified period of time. Let's paint a scenario. Somebody's renting an apartment and they would like to buy it. The landlord would like to sell it to them. And so this is you lease it for now, and then we'll put a little bit of money aside for a down payment. And when we get to the down payment, then you can purchase the property at a later date. That's called a lease purchase agreement. In some states, they call it an installment contract or installment agreement. Okay. Next, there are two players. So like, you have buyer and seller. So let's say if my landlord was going to sell me the place that I'm renting, well, I'm the tenant and I'm the lessee and they're the lessor, right? If I'm renting it. In a lease purchase agreement, the fancy name changes. Instead of calling them a lessee and lessor, right? We call there is a vendor and a vendee. All right. Now the vendor in this example is the landlord or the lessor, is the property owner who leases the property to the tenant under the terms of the agreement. And then there's a vendee. The vendee or tenant is the individual who leases the property with an option to purchase it in the future according to the terms outlined in the leases purchase agreement. Now, what you also want to know is that the vendor has legal title. Think of it like the landlord still has the deed to the property. They own it until they convey the deed over it when the tenant, now buyer, buys the property. But the vendee has equitable title, which means they have the right to own the property so long as they perform properly in the future. So that's another element you might want to know. Sometimes advanced test writers might go after something like that. Like it could say in an installment contract or in a lease purchase agreement, the vendor has, and you pick legal title if that's an option. And then, the vendee has equitable title, which is, and if that's an option. So you want to look out for that. You want to know they're called vendor, vendee. That's a lease purchase agreement, also called an installment contract. Ba-boom. What is a counter offer? This is going to happen in contracts, and they want you to know on real estate exams many times, what happens when someone doesn't fully accept an offer as presented. So what is a counter offer? It's an offer that occurs when the seller responds to a buyer's offer with modified terms, such as changes to the price, closing date, any extra contingencies, or any other terms. And so it's sort of a response not fully accepting the original offer. Implications of a counteroffer can include the following: termination of the original offer. So that's something you want to know. That's what many times test writers write about on examinations, is you make an offer, I don't fully accept it, now the original offer is terminated. The renegotiation components, and then new terms potentially. Other vocab phrases that you might see are things like contingencies, etc., amendments, modifications to the contract, and so on. That's all the world of counteroffers. Definitely know and expect a counteroffer style question or two on examinations. They do show up, and now that you kind of know what they are, good luck with that.
Nice job, everyone. My final piece of advice for you while you're studying for the exam is to grab a copy of your testing provider's outline. So be it PSI, Pearson VUE, or whoever administers your exam, and just go topic by topic and reference your textbook or my videos and just break it up one section at a time so you don't get overwhelmed. If you have limited time before your exam, focus on those high-ticket items such as real estate contracts, agency, the practice of real estate, and property valuation. As always, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you in the next one.